All right. Thanks for organizers to include my paper to such a great conference. And also, I really thank Justin who accepted to discuss this paper last night. so he emailed me like 3 a.m. last night.
It was 6 a.m. this morning.
You did such a amazing job. All right, so this is a joint work with Kosuke. He's an econometrician and Wisconsin Madison. Yuya is a PhD student at UC Austin, and Ryosuke is a data science director of the company that we are working. Right, so let me start with the motivation. So retention management, how to manage retention is a important part, key of the successful customer relationship management, and especially so for the early stage customers who have just been acquired, first time buyers, second time buyers, because the retention rate of those for early stage customers particularly low. Right? The retention rate is going to be going up and stabilize once they purchase more and more. Right? So increasing the retention rate of those first time buyers, second time buyers is especially important for the successful customer relationship management. So, of course, many companies, especially e-commerce companies who can collect a lot of behavioral data, they do a lot of data-driven customer relationship management to improve those first-time buyers. So these are kind of examples that many companies do. They send thank you messages to appreciate the first-time purchase, or sometimes they send $10 coupon or $15 coupon discounts, so that they're trying to incentivize all those first-time buyers to make the second purchase. But when we think about how to design the data-driven customer relationship management for those first-time buyers, there are, I think, a few challenges that we should focus on. The first challenge is the dynamics. There is a well-known paper by Nelson and his co-authors. They point out that the intention to buy or purchase probability is going to be smaller and smaller as the time since the last purchase increases, especially so for the first-time buyers. So first-time buyers, they have a relatively higher intention to buy at the beginning, right after they made the first purchase, but the probability is kind of going down. Right? So given this kind of downward sloping curve, when to target is becoming more and more important, right? Because say this is coming from our data. This is the day in the recency for the first purchase. The probability of purchase is the y-axis. Given this downward sloping curve, if the company targets too early, right, at the beginning, the intention to buy is still high. So therefore, even though we send coupon, the thank you message, those going to be probably waste of time. They have still a high intention to buy. But if we wait too late, like here, the probability is always too small. So maybe they're going to respond to coupon the thank you messages. But in any case, because the baseline is too low, the effect of the coupon or thank you messages may be too low. So we have to identify when is optimal timing to contact those customers. We have to do this for each customer. That's the first challenge, especially for the first-time buyers. The situation is not really stabilized yet. So the situation is non-stationary. That's the first challenge. The second challenge is the budget constraints. When I started working with those companies, I realized that many marketing teams do not have huge budget. Right? So they have limited budget, and they have to allocate those budget across different projects. Even within the same project, they have to think about how to allocate that marketing resource across different customers. So when only a small subset of customers can receive some financial incentives and coupon the discounts, which customers should be targeted is going to be more and more. So we're going to kind of combine those two pieces together in this study. So what we're going to do in this paper is to propose a framework to create dynamic, personalized policies given intertemporal budget constraints. Okay. It's going to be more clear, but the policy that we're going to identify is going to be non-stationary. That's one benefit over some existing. To do so, we're going to extend the recent literature of dynamic treatment imaging, DTR. DTR has been developed in medicine, personalized medicine. But this has close connection to recent literature of dynamic policy planning study in statistics. So we're going to extend the existing methods of DTL to accommodate intertemporal constraints and some non-stationality. We're going to apply this method to the experimental data from a large e-commerce company, a platform in Japan. Now the good news is the company is very happy with the algorithm we developed. The company is still using this algorithm even a year after. They see the 6% increase in retention rates, which generates more than $30 million additional profits. The bad news is I don't get anything. I got a paper. That's the best part. All right. For the sake of the time, let me skip the literature. So let me talk more about the setup and the data, the experiments we run. So we are working with a large Japanese e-commerce platform. The platform is mainly selling apparel. The target is mainly the female, young, maybe between 20 to 30. That's the main target. But this apparel platform is the largest apparel platform in Japan. Okay. So this is a big platform. We observe a lot of first-time buyers. So average monthly first-time buyers is about 200,000. Probably partially because of COVID, we ran this project during COVID. So because of COVID, work from home, people stay longer at home. We see more first-time buyers than the regular times of like pre-COVID. But anyway, we have a lot of first-time buyers. The current strategy for those first-time buyers is basically sending an appreciation email. So after 2 days and 10 days, 30 days of their first purchase, they send a thank you message. And in the thank you message, of course, they provide some information on how to use the platform. These are like how to search products, things like that. They provide some additional information. That's a status quo strategy. Okay. So the company's goal is to increase the retention rate of the first-time buyers. That's the company's key KPI. So we did actually 2 experiments. Yes, sir.
Why is the KPI retention?
Yeah. Well, that's a fair question. I also asked that question. Well, that's probably easier to measure. But of course, there is strong correlation between CLD and the second-time purchase. So when we evaluate policies we estimate, we do care about not only the retention, but also the long-term cost benefit. So we run 2 experiments in this project. The first experiment, the treatment is adding the coupon. In addition to the thank you message, the coupon is 1,000 points, which is like $10 approximately. And this coupon does not have any expression date. Okay, so the 1,000 points will be added to the customer's wallet, and the company can use this point anytime. So each customer is randomly assigned 3 different treatment groups: 2 days group, 10 days group, or 30 days group, or the control group. So there are 4 arms: 3 treatments and 1. One restriction the company added is that each customer can receive his coupon at most once. So there is no customer who receives more than 2 coupons. Okay. Our theory does not. Our theory is more flexible. We can allow more flexible policies, but the company did not want to send more than 2 coupons. That's a restriction. So the optimal counterfactual policies we're going to estimate is going to be within this domain. So we cannot estimate the optimal policies if we allow sending more than 2 coupons, but we restrict ourselves that. But this is the first experiment. So the experiment looks like this. After the first-time purchase, the randomization occurs. Each customer is allocated into 4 buckets: 2 days treatment, 10 days treatment, 30 days treatment, or control. Okay. But anyway, everybody receives those 3 emails. thank you messages. This is the first experiment. The follow-up experiment, the second experiment is going to separately identify the effect of thank you message and the coupon. The first experiment, everybody receives this thank you message anyway, so we cannot estimate the effect of this without coupon, no coupon thank you message email. So the second experiment, we have two treatments, email only or email plus coupons. So that's an additional thing that allows us to estimate not only the effect of coupons, but also the effect of email. Control received nothing. The control group in this, the second experiment, control group received nothing, no email. The first experiment, everybody receives. The first experiment, the control group receives emails only, but no coupon. Second experiment, the control group this is not a group transaction. The control group receives no email. And then maybe the coupon should be received at most once. If you receive coupon here, day 2, you will receive either email or nothing. Day 10 or email, nothing. Right. This is just balance check. This is summary statistics. In this project, we use more than 100 state variables. The state variables include the browsing behavior, the information about the first purchase, what kind of items they purchased for the first time, the responses to email, responses to other marketing campaigns. We have a bunch of state variables that includes more than 100 variables. So I cannot show the summary statistics of all variables. So I just randomly pick up 10 variables just to give you a sense of what kind of variables exist in a data set.
These are in yen, right?
Yes, Japanese yen. We observe, of course, some demographic variables, gender, age. We also know the states that each customer is living in. The page view, those are browsing behavior, the quantity, number of items they actually purchased for the first time, and also the spending, coupon, the other type of coupon, session, the browsing behavior, also response to the marketing campaigns. Those are just examples. We have a lot more variables in data set. Okay, so before getting to the dynamic treatment regime, just
You sort of skipped to the balance. How comparable to the Kosuke example, the Kosuke example? Kosuke is much more likely for people who might not have been regularly networks. Only the 2 days.
Yeah, so this is a balance check. What I'm showing here is a histogram of p-value between the treatment group, each treatment group, and the control group. Because we have so this is 2 days, and 2 days times control, the 10 days versus control, and 30 days versus control. And here, what I'm showing is the histogram of p-value. We have 200 variables, so I cannot show the comparison between treatment control for 200 variables. I just plot each variable is 1 point in histogram. So I'm showing this is a t-value. Why? This is a t-value. This is -2, this is 2. So this means that most of the variables, the difference between the treatment and control is not statistically significant. There are a few outside the -2 and 2, but those variables, there are some statistical difference between treatment.
But is there self-selection into 30-day treatment?
Yeah.
Like it depends on no purchase.
Right.
In the 30 days. Okay.
Yeah, that's right. So this is the average treatment effect. But I'm not really interested, and I'm not really interpreting too much from the average treatment effect. This is simply regressing the retention, first column of sales, total spending, or number of items on those three treatments. One caveat is exactly what Ken said. There is some selection problem, so I don't really interpret too much from the algorithm. But the key thing I want to say is the 2-day treatment effect increases 2.4%, the retention rate by 2.4%. The 10-day treatment increases retention by 1.4%. 30 days increases retention by 1.5%. So it is decreasing, of course, I would expect, but also there is some nonlinear relationship, like 30 days treatment effect. 30 days effect is slightly bigger than the 10 days treatment effect. So there is some nonlinearity here.
Which experiment was this?
Oh, this is the first one.
First.
I'm sorry. Yeah,
In the second experiment, when you have, for example, someone get the coupon
And
on
also-
day 2,
Mhm.
and then the next 2 periods.
Either.
or, does that you actually four
Either or.
arms?
Yeah. There are 4 arms. Again, I don't want it to do complicated. So this is the first experiment. That's all.
For 30 days, is it, for example, 30 days, is it conditional on not having bought anything else until
Exactly.
day 30?
Exactly.
Don't you think that might be the reason that the 2 days is the most
Yeah,
effective?
exactly. That's one potential reason. So even though we include, the numbers don't change much, but yeah, that's true.
Could you also put this in a intention to treat sense then? Because we did the randomization beforehand and then we can kind of see, even if they did purchase before that 30-day mark, we can still kind of roll them into the intention to treat method.
Yeah, I agree.
Should I be thinking about these increases from the perspective of the cost of the platform compared to the incentive? This is like a downward sloping dynamic, right? But you're reducing the price.
To reduce in price.
You're giving $10.
Yeah.
So how I should, it's not a zero cost.
Yeah, I mean, once we get to the DTR, then I'm going to show you the results and then you will see. Okay. So, I mean, again, I'm not, interpreting too much from this average effects because there are a whole bunch of arts to interpret this average treatment effects. But what I want to emphasize here is if you just look at the average treatment effects, 2 days effect is bigger than 10 days and 30 days. So if you don't personalize at all, the optimal strategy is going to send out the coupons 2 days after. So that's going to be our baseline. We can optimize later, but that's going to be the baseline.
How is retention computed? Is it from the time point of the
Yeah.
or
From the first time purchase.
first time of purchase?
Yeah.
Then they need it. Just that they are more like, do you think this up? Because it can run.
Oh, the coupon, but there is no expression date for coupon. So I'm not sure if that much. The coupon does not expire.
The retention is defined as the.
Oh, so how do we measure retention? How do we measure retention? Whether or not I buy the second time, 2 months after the first time purchase, or the 3 months after the first purchase. You can, within 2 months or within 3 months. So there is no significant difference between 2 months and 3 months. There is no difference. We can add more, but we think the 3 months is fair enough to capture the retention. It depends on the purchase cycle, but I think 3 months is long enough to capture the effect of coupon on second time purchase. And also additional thing I want to show is there is heterogeneity. This is just plotting the average treatment effect per decile. So in terms of the page view per day, in terms of page view per day, I just split into deciles. These people plus more, these people plus less, and what in each bin, what is average treatment effect? We see that those who observe, those who browse more tend to have higher ATE. And this is in terms of the spending for the first time purchase. So those who spend less for the first time purchase, they have higher ATE rather than those who spend more for the first time. So, of course, I just pick up two variables, and there are a lot more variables we can look at heterogeneity, but regardless of which variables we're going to pick, we can still see significant heterogeneity across users. Okay. So, because there is heterogeneity across users, there is, it makes sense to personalize and target. So that's the whole point of question. Okay, so let me explain dynamic treatment routing. I'm going to explain in 4 steps. First, I'm going to introduce what this dynamic treatment routing is, and then we're going to explain, we can add more features. Okay. What is the DTR? DTR is a sequence of strategy and policies, each of which maps from the history HT to the action space AT. It can be stochastic, so it can be deterministic. The history HT includes the state variables that I have explained, the browsing behavior, responsive marketing, etc. That could be time variables. XT, that's the state variable, which is a part of the history, but also the past actions, whether or not I receive emails, I receive coupons, those are additional history. The DT is going to be mapping from history to the action space. For the sake of explanation, I'm going to focus on the binary case, but it's easy to extend to more than binary action sets. Okay. And then we have the data. We have the data HI for each user. We can observe history of state variables and actions and outcomes from our experimental data. Okay. So from the experimental data, we know the data generating policy, D0, that generates our policies. And using this data HI, we can maximize here, maximize this objective function here, which is the expected retention. Why? This is a binary outcome, expected retention if we take the policy D. Okay. So here, like our discussion, if you want to maximize the CLV, we can replace this Y as a CLV. Okay. And that's easy, but because the company's key KPI that they want to maximize is the second term retention, this is outcome variable we can maximize. Okay. So I'm going to now introduce 2 approaches to solve this problem. Probably I don't have enough time to talk about the details of each approach, but we take 2 approaches. One is Q-lining approach. The other is backward outcome weighted lining approach, BOW approach. The Q-lining approach, this is a more indirect approach, where we're going to maximize this conditional expectation of retention given history and action. This is the kind of value function. Okay. We're going to first estimate a value function from the experimental data, and in the second step, we're going to maximize the objective function, the value function, to derive the optimal policies. Okay. So that's one strategy. So we can solve the problem backwards from the last period. The period of 3 means 30 days. We can maximize the value function of period 3. Given that, we can solve the 10 days problem, period 2, given what we're going to do in period 3. And for our first stage, day 2, we can solve this problem given what we're going to do in period 2 and period 3. So by solving this problem backwards, we can derive the optimal policies. Yeah.
Can you explain the complication here on an approach? Let's say just estimate on all this first data, and then for each consumer, 50% of each treatment, just choose the best one. Also, why would that work? Why do I need this kind of dynamic structure?
Because depending on what I do respond, say I receive email in day 2, I'm going to receive, and I'm going to somehow respond to that. I'm going to browse more, or I'm going to change behavior or something. Depending on that, the company wants to change their strategy in period 10, that's period 2. So by taking into account the information that they can receive after day 2 responses to the first action, they can update the policy. That's the rough follow-up.
In your experiment, you didn't put data.
We don't do.
Experiments.
Yes.
How can you estimate what will happen with the dynamic policy if you never vary the policy?
Well, if we can estimate this value function, we can fill in the action they are not taken in the data.
But you didn't see anyone that saw, I don't know, an email after 2 days, and then you split those who did buy, see another email after 2 days, and those who didn't buy, see another thing, etc. So are you gonna announce something about
Yeah, we assume that the value function is this conditional expectation. We can estimate this conditional expectation by, say, random forest or linear regression or something like that. So that kind of assume some, say, if you take linear regression, that assume something for the cases we don't observe. This is pretty much the prediction. Most ones, yeah. So what?
Then the action will take a different. You know, there's already 180 that you want.
Yeah, that's right. Actually, I don't have much. Sorry. This is the second approach, the ball approach. The ball approach, I'm going to talk about just a big picture of this. The key concept of ball approach is to transform the estimation of the optimal DTR problem into a classification problem, the weighted classification problem. So this is the objective function the company wants to solve. This can be reformulated as the weighted average of this object. Then we're going to maximize this object. This is the weighted by the propensity score that we observe in the data because we run experiments. We can rewrite the objective function, company's objective function into this this thing. And this maximization problem is exactly the same as the minimization problem of the misclassification. But the weight is not the uniform across observation, but weight is determined by the propensity score. So this approach, we can simply solve this misclassification minimization problem, not by estimating any value function, Q function. So this is a direct approach. Given the data, given the experimental data we have, by weighting each observation, we can directly solve this problem to get the optimal. Okay, so this is more, there's no intermediate step to calculate the value function. In the third step, we're going to introduce a budget constraint. The problem we are solving is this, but now we're going to have the budget constraint. The budget constraint looks like we can provide the coupons at most P% of the customers. We can generalize this budget constraint into more general budget constraints, but as a starting point, this is a good starting point. So up to P% of the customers can receive the coupons. For the static case, it is an easy problem. For the static case, this is an easy problem. Exactly like Avner said, we can estimate a conditional average treatment effect, and then sort the customers in terms of conditional average treatment effect, and then pick up top 3%. That's the easy case. So the optimal strategy in the static case is going to be the threshold strategy. In a dynamic case, and it's also easy to calculate this optimal strategy in a static case. In a dynamic case, it's going to be more complicated. We cannot just sort the conditional average treatment effect and give the coupons top P%.
So I just want to understand what the model is trying to do. So if you're the company, you say P% of those, that's my budget for the $10.
Yeah.
So day one, I observe everybody, and then I'm going to give a few coupons. Day two, observe everybody, give a few coupons minus and reduce my P. Day3, I observe everybody else.
What I'm gonna do is say the marketing team has, let's say, $1,000, and each coupon is say $10, and we can provide up to 100 people. So within the 30 days, we can allocate these 100 coupons across different users. But if I provide too many coupons at day two, not much left.
What
Day
if
10,
you're
day 30.
people's behaviors every day and then changing who you're going to give coupons to or not?
Not every day, not every day, only 2 days or 10 days or 5 days.
Oh, okay, only 2 days.
Yeah, so the time frame we fix it. Because that's the
The
experimental
time
variation.
frame, you reallocate your.
Right.
I think there is a confusion on my part because it seems like your whole model is predictive, right? Not causal. But we keep talking about policies and how optimal policies should be changed depending on that, right? So I think like this is like what I'm used to. I don't know if anybody else is doing the same thing. If it's predictive, if it's a predictive model, I would expect to see other models who are predicting this and your prediction model and see how yours fare against those. And if it's about policy changes, I don't see anything that I can say about the policy here because it's all prediction.
This is not, this is not prediction. This is causal. We're gonna use the experimental data to learn the upfront policy. Given the data we have, that's the observational, we randomize this the coupons. Using that, we can learn the upfront policy. That's a causal.
So you are using the experiments,
Yeah.
you are developing this model, but you're using your experiment, call it causal. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, so I have to be careful of what I mean by prediction, what I mean by causal, but that's the goal is to derive the upfront policy given using this experimental. Well, I have 5 minutes.
You got, take another time.
I think implicitly the plenary plus the speaker comes to like 45 minutes. So we've been using some of your time.
Yeah, so am I. So for the dynamic case, the problem is a bit more complicated. But in the paper, we show that the upfront strategy also looks like a threshold strategy. But threshold is determined by not only the conditional average return effect, but also the ratio between the conditional average return effect for each period and the cost for each period. So it's more complicated, but it still looks like a threshold strategy. That's what I showed in the paper. And we also provide some algorithms to derive the upfront policies for the multi-period cases. This is an example for the 2-period case, but basically the algorithm looks like the inner loop and outer loop. The inner loop is going to solve the upfront policy given some shadow prices, or we can say Lagrange multipliers. And then in the outer loop, we're going to solve the optimal Lagrange multipliers. That's the algorithm we're going to solve. Okay. Yes.
The policy that you learned with this inner loop narrative, is that an optimal policy or is it, I don't know?
It's not optimal. So take any shadow prices. We're gonna solve this problem, but it may not be optimal. So on the outer loop, we're gonna solve with respect to this lambda, the shadow prices, to get the optimal policies.
Right? If I buy something, you don't then send me the emails or coupons later, right?
It's not included. Those are not included.
I think part of the confusion for some of us might be that in your experiment, because it's not a dynamic problem, there's selection of who gets the next stage. And as soon as you put the dynamic policy on board and you say, look, you should have sent coupon at day 10 instead, doesn't that change the selection process for your day 30 decisions?
So the selection concern is those who buy, say day 1, they're not gonna get any.
I think the concern is the treatment effects of days 2, 10, and 30 are inclusive of the selection effect who gets to those thresholds, and it's not the ITT. And then when you do a dynamic policy, how does the fact that if you change the policy based on those treatment effects, yeah, whoever gets to the next stage, that composition of people might be different.
So to estimate the overall quality, what we need is, given the history, the next treatment is randomized. So everybody actually in the experiment, everybody receives, regardless if you buy or not buy, everybody receives this treatment. And as long as this is randomized, we can still estimate the overall quality. So there is selection, but for the estimation purpose, basically it doesn't.
Previous sequences are not in the history.
Previous first is equals. It is
randomized. So what is it that is considered for the? The history is of the variable, right?
Yes.
If we got emails before, it was some random number.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you consider those as randomly generated? And then,
It's not randomly generated. Yeah, it's not random.
so,
But those are the XD is orthogonal to the treatment. Because randomized.
but going forward, they're not going to. But anyway, well, I'll ask you later, maybe on this.
Okay. Yeah. Well, sorry. Let me just show you some results. Let me skip this. So this is showing the uplift of the two models, the ball approach or Q-learning approach, with different budget, the 20 yen, the 30 yen, or no budget. And this is the baseline policy. Okay. To measure the performance of each method, you can look at the last one. This is basically ROI. Of course, we impose constraints. If you impose constraints, the retention rate decreases. But actually, we can achieve relatively high retention rate with much cheaper cost. So that gives us much higher ROI. So the ball Q line, those give us much cost-effective retention policies. And we do see that the optimal policy looks like this. Okay, so it is not optimal always to send coupons in day 2. Significant fraction of people should receive coupons in day 30. And we don't see anyone receive day 10 as inoptimal policies. So there is sending the coupon in day 2 is not always optimal. For some people, you should send coupons later stage. The good.
These are simulation results, or you?
This is offline policy results. So these are simulations. And after that, company was willing to implement our policy in online. That's the next result. This is the online policy evaluation, and the company was willing to run experiments to check the performance of our policies. This is dynamic ball without cost. This is dynamic Q-learning without budget constraints. And the last one is our policy constraint dynamic ball. And we have baseline. Again, if you look at lowest, the ROI, we have a much higher return on investment for our proposed constraint dynamic ball. We were surprised to see such a high ROI. Again, we did this project during COVID, and the market situation changes day by day. Japan experienced a series of lockdown and opens, etc. So that's one lesson. The market changes quite a lot. So offline results do not really reflect the online actual results. But overall, we are happy to see that our policy achieves really high return on investment. Right. So let me wrap up. So what we are doing in this paper is we propose a framework to derive the dynamic optimal policy, the top localized policy, given the intertemporal budget constraint. And we apply this method to the experimental data from the large Japanese e-commerce platform. And the company is again still using this platform 1 year after we started this project. They got really high retention rate. They are not. So we are still doing another project with this company to do something similar to this project. So this is all I have. It's the very top one discussion of what the business. Yeah. Oh.
Right. Oh, and there's a microphone above. All right, perfect. That makes it a little bit easier for you guys to hear me. So hi everyone, I'm Justin, Assistant Professor of Marketing over at University of Michigan's Ross School of Business. I heard that I would be delivering a discussion somewhere around 9 p.m. last night that fully got pulled into it this morning. So here we are. But in all serious note, it was a really interesting paper. I really enjoyed it, and I think it's tackling a very relevant problem. And of course, as a consumer with biases and limited computational capacity, when I think about whether or not something is a interesting or a common problem or not, I utilize the availability heuristic. And how did I go about that? In this case, well, I looked into my emails. It didn't take me very long. I scrolled just 10 emails in, and immediately I have a retention strategy that's very similar to the one that's being studied here. I got this offered for $10 back if I shop on Amazon through Venmo. So definitely very ubiquitous. In all serious note, it's a very ubiquitous a challenge that a lot of these online platforms face. And of course, the rub here is around when and how, and potentially at least how many of these offers should we deliver. Especially because it's a proactive retention strategy, you run the risk of, well, if we give to individuals that would have purchased anyways, then we are potentially foregoing revenue on those purchases. Alternatively, and as we've seen there, if we wait a little bit too long, well, then the likelihood of purchase is going to go down over time, right? And if we lose that window, then any potential treatment might have a diminished effect. So therefore, the exact timing of when to treat an individual on a personalized basis is a very interesting question. And the additional kind of change to this is also in adding in a budget constraint. So a lot of firms, for one reason or another, sometimes well motivated by experimentation, other times due to maybe typical marketing budgeting policy. Maybe they have heuristics such as 2%, 5% perhaps of your total revenue can go back into marketing budget. Well, you might have some sort of budget constraint. And then the question is then, how do we spend that constraint over time? We spend more of it today, then we have less tomorrow, so on and so forth. Just a brief summary of the paper. The goal of the authors was, well, we want to create a dynamic treatment regime. We want to be able to create essentially a state-based policy based on kind of these 90 different state variables that are there within the model, and use that to determine, well, when should we treat this, whether we should treat this individual. And of course, one of the interesting aspects of this context was that, well, we have a rule such that once an individual has been treated, they can't be treated again. So that factors heavily into the model, and I think that led to maybe some of the frictions in terms of the questions that came up during the talk itself. What do the authors do in order to estimate this dynamic treatment regime? Well, they run an experiment. They run an experiment that randomizes the timing of when individuals would be subject to this $10 coupon. And the idea behind this, the motivating idea behind this experiment is that, like what they mentioned, the treatment will be orthogonal to their current history, right? So even regardless of what your history is going up to this point, well, there's going to be a random draw. That random draw will determine whether or not you get treated within that period. And that way we can estimate some notion of, you could say like it's a state value function, right? This in the model called the Q learning, as I was taught it, we called it like a state value function, or at least an action state value function. And of course, we're going to take these, we're going to, once we've estimated the dynamic treatment regime, put that into both our offline simulations as well as run a online test on the large Japanese e-commerce platform. In terms of general contribution, this is definitely large. It's a growing literature in terms of how do we estimate these dynamic and personalized policy functions. This new proposed methodology allows for an intertemporal budget constraint. So it's not just a single period budget constraint, but rather it reflects that if we're spending today, then that's $0 tomorrow. And of course, based on the current period's realization, then that could mean that we have unexpectedly less budget tomorrow. It utilizes a non-Markovian dynamic setup. So in this way, we are capturing the full range of the user's history, not just kind of a single period like a single state, but rather whether or not they have opened emails, not just today, but yesterday, the day before, potentially allows for a very, very rich state space. And the great thing about this model is that it's computationally light. And as Kosuke mentioned and demonstrated in the paper, it actually is able to function with a large number of state variables. In this case, the paper had over 90 of them. I think another really interesting aspect of this study was the fact that they were able to validate the results. Many of us are working with platforms on a regular basis. We know how difficult it is to get a large platform to do anything, and in particular, anything that involves kind of complicated mathematics, anything more than like a simple heuristic. I think that's very well demonstrated by the fact that the baseline was just, we're going to treat everyone if they haven't bought at the 2-day mark, right? That's a very simple baseline. And of course, convincing a platform to go about and trust you enough to do this, I think is a really interesting, really fascinating to see our work have these large results. In terms of the general strengths of the paper, I'd say it reads really well. I'd encourage everyone to read it, especially the PhD students in the room. It was great in terms of translating relatively dense technical material into very easily interpretable prose. I found myself learning a lot as I read through it. They conduct a lot of different tests of different implementations, different machine learning methods in order to estimate this notion of like a state value function. I thought that was really interesting, as well as they did an extension towards multiple actions. In this case, the multiple actions could include not just do we give the coupon or not give the coupon, but do we do nothing? Do we do coupon plus email, or do we do just an email itself? It's a very salient problem, as I mentioned, for platforms that are looking to utilize big data experimentation or to target their marketing actions towards these consumers. And like I mentioned, again, the difficulty working with these large platforms, it's rare to have an experiment that has real impact, and especially a large real impact too. So I thought that was really interesting. In terms of some areas for potential development or directions for future research, I think this challenge came up within our discussions of, well, there's the room for maybe richer dynamics, right? We have just 3 periods that are going on here. If we were to really show off kind of what is the lift that's associated with this model over simpler heuristics, I think a longer time period would have been great to demonstrate that. So of course, it also reflects my high praise for the paper that my first recommendation is also one that's relatively, you could say, infeasible, right? It's difficult to convince the platform, okay, well, let's try this and let's stretch it out to 10 periods or some longer time period. But I think it would be really interesting. It would lead to a little bit richer results. I worry that in terms of the dynamics that are being shown here, we don't really capture a lot of dynamics. It seems like a lot of the actual timing of when to treat these individuals are coming in from the estimated average treatment effects. So you can see here, if we look at the average treatment effects, so this laser, yes it is. If we look at the average treatment effects between like the 2 days, the 10 days, and the 30 days, we see that's much larger for the 2 days and the 30 days. And that seems to overwhelmingly drive the timing of the treatment here. So I worry that kind of all that richness that's coming in through the state variables isn't being realized, and instead is being like overwhelmingly pushed by the average treatment effects. Another potential point of friction, of course, this came up, when we think about these dynamic contexts, oftentimes we're thinking about the potential for multiple treatments. The fact that, conditional on an individual being treated, then they might bifurcate, they might go down 1 of 2 different paths. And then we might face that question again, well, how and whether do we treat these individuals? And how does that affect the evolution of the state space? And essentially in the 3-period context, and given that conditional upon an individual being treated, they're not able to be treated again, it narrows the state space quite considerably, or at least the action space quite considerably. Whereas in practice, we might have much larger ones. So if there were any ways to do that, or at least even if we couldn't test that through an experiment on the platform, if you could kind of write about this as a potential extension, I think that'd be really interesting to a lot of the audience. And of course, again, myself utilizing my availability heuristic, I asked myself, how often does this happen? Well, dug into my email inbox and found a lot of examples whereby I'm being targeted for multiple offers. Again, here from Venmo. 2 last closing thoughts. Was the budget constraint really necessary, you could say, or is it recommended in this context? We saw the return on advertising spending be very large, in the thousands of percent. You might say, well, maybe that reflects revenue. It doesn't necessarily reflect profits, but if it's an apparel retailer, then the margins should be pretty good. And this would seem to suggest that we should be treating many more individuals than we actually are. So maybe if there were a context whereby this question of the budget constraint would maybe bite a little bit more, that could be more interesting. And then one last point here, you showed it up in the slides. I think there was a bit of confusion around the design of the second experiment. And as it exists in the paper, it's largely relegated to the appendix, but it also kind of pops up in various spots throughout the paper. So maybe there'd be a good way to either maybe cut it entirely and then just leave it out, or give it kind of the full weight that it needs to and let it be fully realized and bring that in there. So those are my thoughts. Thank you. I really enjoyed it.